The thing about bullet hells is that they are true to their name, a near endless torture that many people willingly subject themselves to. Eyes darting, sweat beading, fingers damn near breaking to dodge some random pixels. They are opt-in sensory overloads that push the boundaries of the senses games activate, that being seeing, hearing, and feeling, unlike any other genre. Mix in the frequently punishing short runs that roguelikes have become known for, their instant reward structure furthering our cravings for challenge, plus the pacing of an RPG battle, which leaves intermittent windows of time to appreciate just how fucked you are. And the hell I described earlier becomes that just more delicious. What I am partially describing to you is the first game from Darion Mccoy, Soulbaby, and the first glimpse into what I've determined is this creative's obsession with bodies. And I can't blame him. I mean, seriously, what's up with our bodies? Walking testaments to imperfect design. They break easy, they age too fast and too slow. I personally consider an evolutionary failure that we do not have wings, or at least some ability to fucking fly. And even if you don't share my frustration about our species' lack of natural flight, you've almost definitely had something about your own body you want to change at some point. We wish we could fill some things in, shave some things off, smaller here, bigger there. While not everyone is unhappy with their body, we are constantly in conversation with it, working within the constraints it has given us by function and by perception, together and separately. It's an often ugly and beautiful thing, too complicated for its own good. These are just some of the thoughts that circled my mind after playing through the collection of games I'm going to talk about today. All of them coming away from a developer by the name of Darion Mccoy. Now, I first learned about McCoy through Blue Sky after seeing a post of his that shared a collection of images from his upcoming game Angel's Nest. I was frankly enraptured by the art. Old school in its 2D aesthetic, but haunting the way that it composed the environments to tower over the single character and frame. Now pair all of what I just said with the description that McCoy gave this game, which was a folk horror survival RPG set in an alternative pre-colonial Africa, and I immediately had a new game to look out for in the future, as well as a new curiosity for what he had already made, which brings us back to the subject of bodies. From Soulbaby, to Worms, to Rebody, each one of McCoy's games starts a conversation with the player about bodies. Not the same conversation, and certainly not in the same way, but a discussion that seems aimed at making us think about the flesh shoots we collectively inhabit nonetheless. Having played all of them, McCoy's works ultimately ask us to not limit how we think about the bodies, but instead ingrain under our skin the understanding that bodies, in part because of their constraints, have limitless potential. So, let's start with this first game, Soulbaby. Or, more accurately, Soulbaby Remastered as it's called on Steam. The oldest of the games that will be discussed today, although old is relative considering it was released in September 2022, Soulbaby gives players, as a barely formed baby, a goal they'll never be able to complete: return to their mother. It's one of the first things that players are met with when booting up the game, already framing the experience as one distinctly around the traditional maternal origin of all bodies. Now, from a gameplay perspective, Soulbaby is an exhilarating experience. Backdropped by a small but bumping soundtrack that keeps your head banging, players will survive waves upon waves of souls until the timer runs out on a given level. Over time, players will accumulate experience points that they can use to purchase more abilities, recruit allies, and increase skills. For me, the real propulsion of the game stems from chaining takedowns to fill up these break meters on the side, which have the dual effect of giving you access to more of your abilities while also shrinking the game stage. A daunting reality given how integral space is for dodging bullets in a bullet hell game. When two or more are on screen, you can break one and do massive damage to all enemies at once, effectively clearing out the board and resetting the rhythm of the action. It all comes together in a way that demands complete focus and attention from the player, showcasing a strong ability to make me hit the frequently sought after flow state that many games try to create. What this specific smorgasbord of genres manages to pull off most effectively is at one point, I was no longer holding a controller that's moving some pixels on a screen, with all my faculties completely engrossed in the single task of survival, of making sure this baby can make it to tomorrow. I was now simply moving an extension of myself. The baby, which I can morph and customize to my own liking, had just become another limb. My body, for these brief moments of sensory overload, had been expanded. Moreover, while certainly less an in-game narrative choice and more a circumstance of meta conditions, i.e. a developer whose life pulled him in a direction away from this particular project, Soulbaby as a whole ends up embodying the human condition in a strangely apt way. It fails unexpectedly when pushed to its limits, as the game crashed 4 separate times while I played it. Fortunately, it saved frequently, so I never actually lost significant progress. The baby itself has traveled long and hard, morphed itself and its abilities to survive what existence has thrown at it, only to come to the end and discover not their mother, but just more enemies. See, this game has no real ending, which isn't surprising given it's an early access game that hasn't been updated in years. As is, it is impossible to both return to mother or return to the baby you once were. The human body, much like this poor baby, for all the ways we can navigate it, ultimately only progresses forward until it dies. Worms is the next game from Darion Mccoy, and one where I died a lot. And for all my comparisons to hell with Soulbaby, the scenario players find themselves in with Worms might fit your idea of the nightmare pit much better. Players arrive at Evergrove, a place often considered a rumor, a place that comes to you and never vice versa. The Evergrove is full of several things: shovels for digging holes, axes for chopping trees, and a gun for shooting the killer that's chasing you in the woods. The goal for the player is to escape from or prevail in Evergrove. What I became quickly impressed with in this stripped down horror game is how it chooses to get across its scares. There's a sinister tension that comes specifically from how the killer moves, as over time they increasingly move faster and faster until it inevitably races towards you like a ghost out of, well, where you are. It is a relentless hunter. You are desperate prey. Prey that will need to be strategic and resilient so as not to meet a grisly demise. You can hurt the killer by using other items like planks and lanterns, but this is ultimately a horror of the monster slasher variety. This motherfucker doesn't stay down. Mostly. Like I said, there's a gun in the Evergrove. And in fact, when you find the supplies to get a gun and load it, paired with the bravery to actually pick a fight with your killer, it actually makes for a pretty good way to get the ending. Or more accurately, an ending. Worms has multiple endings that are progressively unlocked, meaning that the conditions for getting ending B are only unlocked by getting ending C first. And it's here, in the text scrolls of these endings, that I become fully aware of my flesh shoot and its vulnerability. But before we get into that, a quick worthwhile detour is noting how visceral a game Worms can be even before you see any kind of credits. For example, when a killer carves a new opening into your back, the act is pared down to its most striking component: the blood, the axe, the scream. It focuses attention on the parts of the act that define pain and violence. They look the same on everyone. Plus, the playable character's avatar is visibly hurting, in a particularly bloody way that makes you squirm a little. This isn't just a limp that makes you look like a fight was lost, or a flashing of red that makes you look like a siren, but instead, this character is drenched in her own blood, leaking it. Looking like an ambulance should have been called for you 3 hours ago. The ghastly scream you're met with when you die won't be much easier to swallow. It makes you aware of your body in the same way all intentionally crafted gore does. It reveals how fragile we are, how it can break in so many ways, how apathetic the world can be to your pain and dignity when it wants to be. Despite its unnerving graphics, I must now return to Worm's ending text if I want to discuss the real body horror at work. They are the bits that make my skin crawl most. For starters, in ending C, when you shoot the killer enough times, it dissolves into countless worms. You stare at the moon, feeling like it's getting closer to you. And then you lose feelings in your legs, then your fingers. Finally, your arms and torso. Your body folds into a stone, struggling to grasp your increasingly elusive thoughts, until finally, you're left to decompose. It is a horrifying last sentence that reminds us that bodies, for all the values and perceptions we ascribe to them, are no different than any other strange thing in nature. We will decompose. We will all, much like our assailant, eventually become home for worms. It's grotesquely honest. A fitting ending for a game that has been above all else raw in its presentation of death and violence. However, ending C almost looks ideal when compared to ending B. Achieved by eating enough of these mushrooms that appear following reaching ending C once, this finale describes pure nightmare fuel. After attempting to eat one mushroom too many, your character suddenly vomits, brought to their knees by a need to expel something from their body. When they look up, they find the killer is also hurling, except his mouth bursts an enormous, squirming mass pushing against the walls of a translucent sack. It wriggles and writhes until it finally bursts, producing a young girl. The child cleans her body of blood and pus, briefly meets your character's gaze, flashes a scowl, and flees without a word. It is, frankly, just some unnerving shit. Contrary to ending C that focuses distinctly on death and decomposition, here we are met with a violent birth, a pristine being brought into the world by a very ugly process. There is no question that we were involved in that birth, and yet the thing that we have born has little interest in us. Despite it not coming from any part of our character's body, it feels like an amputation almost, rather than a birth. I'd love to tell you that ending A makes sense of all this, but here's where I must be honest and tell you that that would have required me to find ending A, and I am honestly stumped on how to. Seriously, I climbed past even the 100th level in search of this last ending, but after trapping the killer, shooting and burning the killer, running around the entirety of one level, I have very little to show for it. The only progress I made was finding this mirror, which was obtained after using the axe on a material that appears after ending B called rubbish. And after all the time I spent trying to figure out a solution, I just couldn't figure out how to use this mirror. Or if it only could be used at a specific time, just anything. So here's where I say that if any of you decide to check out Worms and find ending A, please come back and share with the class. I love to hear how it's different from ending C and B, and what, if anything, does it have to say about the doomed thing we call the human body. In the meantime, let's discuss the last of Darion Mccoy's released games, and the one that somewhat inspired this video. How it did so would become quickly obvious. So let's talk about Rebody. Narratively described as an expedition where we explore a region full of sentient beings born from memories of generations past, Rebody is a game where you find yourself in a claustrophobic, lonely, non-hostile, but not really welcoming, and often breathtaking pit where you come across crawlers with eyes and white and green figures with spirals for faces. Behind all these swirls are answers from queer people in response to a single question: how do you feel about your body? To put things into further context, McCoy says on the game's itch page that participants were encouraged to think about their feelings in the past and present, and analyze how those feelings may have evolved or not. And the responses were multifaceted, often raw and uncomfortable. They ranged from journal entries to prose to personal essays. The writing was as diverse as the experiences described, with meditations on being trans and transitioning, being a woman and a non-white woman, understanding the role sex plays in life, and much more. It is an incredible anthology full of gut-punching writing that captures a variety of queer existences and experiences, actively using the digital venue and anonymity to share the less glamorous side of navigating the world in a queer body. Given the current US administration's personal grudge against the LGBTQ+ community, especially my trans friends, I find games like this especially important to play since it elevates the voices of those affected and currently being slandered. I also like how this game was constructed to make reading these stories more humane. Rebody is non-linear in structure, meaning there is no set path for how you navigate it. While a green light and radar-like sound will alert you when you're close to a body to talk to, or more accurately listen to, the game does not force you in any one direction. It puts each story on the same playing field, ensuring that the reading order isn't a focus and instead diverts attention to what matters, like reading about someone's experience with bottom dysmorphia, another's dwindling performance of toughness, or simply shots to the hearts like, it's not worth hiding yourself from those who will never like you. I gave up on everything to be on good terms, and I was still hated because of it. It's incredibly refreshing to play a game like Rebody despite the heaviness of its content. While the representation of queer bodies has improved over the years in games, with character customization in particular being a wonderful site of self-expression for many with or without mods, representation of and conversations around them, especially when it comes to games from big studios, are frankly lacking. If you're not checking out the indie space where you're more likely to find games actually made by queer people, or at least just not one or two, A lot of what the public ends up seeing feels like tokenism and or what's an LGBTQ plus 101. As a result, many people don't get to see the full spectrum of the queer experience. With that in mind, I hope you'll entertain another quick detour, because not only do I hope you check out Rebody, but also the wonderful queer and woman-owned independent game site Mothership, which hosts in-depth conversations about gender and identity in games. It's the outlet's explicit focus. And in the interest of transparency, I should tell you that I have contributed to the site before, very recently in fact, but as a freelancer and not as a full-time staff member. I'm recommending them because I truly believe they produce great work, and it would benefit anyone who's even vaguely interested in what I've talked about today to go check them out. So we don't spend too much time here doing free advertising, and so I can probably wrap up this video, I'll link a few pieces below that I feel are particularly relevant to today's topics. While I feel like there's a lot I could say about several of the stories I read in Rebody, I'll reiterate that I think it's best that you check out this one on your own. While I enjoyed everything that I played today, trying to talk about this one risks shortening so many of the experiences that were shared here. Looking back upon McCoy's work, from the sensory-intensive Soulbaby, to the grotesque and horrifying Worms, to the anthology disguised as a walking simulator, Rebody, what I walk away with is a reminder that there are as many ways to talk about the human body as there are bodies. And intentionally or otherwise, I think that's what McCoy ultimately does in these games. Rather than make definitive statements about the human body, he provides spaces for players and other creators to reflect on their relationships with the heart, the limbs, and all the other parts of ourselves that make up this vehicle we all uniquely navigate the world in. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked what you saw, please consider leaving a like, leave a comment if you have any thoughts about the games I talked about, or if you have your own suggestions for games or game developers to check out who also meaningfully discuss or start conversations about the human body. And if you really liked what you saw, also consider subscribing. You're definitely not going to get the same video because none of my videos are the same for the most part, but you will get more thoughtful coverage of video games in the future. And once you're done playing around all the buttons underneath this time bar here, consider checking out my website that's also called Exalclaw. There you'll find even more features, interviews, and the occasional news piece dedicated to, well, video games. Hell, if you really like what you see there, maybe even check out the Patreon. It'll help make this whole operation become self-sustaining, as well as let you get access to my exclusive weekly poetry series, Observing Digital Space Debris. A series where I write poems inspired by video game worlds. But alright, that's enough self-marketing. Thanks again for watching. Please take care of yourself and your loved ones. Ciao.